Hello and welcome to the Final Straight F1 podcast. Again, with me, Ben, and Tonda.
And today we're looking at the story of the 2024 Emilia Romagna Grand Prix.
Very nicely said. Can you say the whole name of the Grand Prix, though?
Oh my god, is that Emilia Romagna? What is the cruise? MSC? Is it in there?
Yes, MSC was there.
Is it Michael Schumacher cruises?
Unfortunately not.
Is it? No, but what is it actually? MSC? What are the cruises? Something Star? I'm a fake fan. I don't even know what the MSC stands for now.
What was the name of the Grand Prix? We need to read it. We need to read it.
We need to read the whole thing to be proper, to have the...
Exactly. So we're gonna start. Oh my freaking god. It was something pretty crazy. Yeah, let's put it that way. It could be a good challenge, huh?
Well, how many words? Was it like 30, 40 words maybe?
Yeah. Let's look at Formula 1. I think it was like 20 odd something words.
That's the sign of being the inferior Grand Prix that takes place in Italy, because the other is just the Italian Grand Prix. Oh, I'm sure they have sponsored, but...
Oh my god, I got the name. It's Formula 1 MSC Cruises Gran Premio del Made in Italy e dell'Emilia Romagna 2024. Holy guacamole. That was not nice.
That's actually better than I thought. Made in Italy makes sense.
Yeah.
MSC Cruises, I guess. Emilia Romagna checks out. But we all know it and love it under the name of Imola. Well, love it. Do we love it? Did we love it? That's a good question. What did you think about the race?
Well, I think that this weekend was kind of bittersweet to an extent, right? Because we know that Imola has with many drivers, it has a love-hate relationship. For example, we know that Ayrton Senna died and Ratzenberg died. It was 30-year anniversary right now, so we've seen Sebastian Vettel, before, the Grand Prix, he was driving Senna's car. Pretty emotional about it. That was very nice. But in terms of the driving, the drivers enjoy this track, right? It's a old school track, right? It punishes your mistakes. Whenever you run wide, you just go into the gravel, right? But the race itself, I feel as though we have outgrown this circuit. I don't know how you feel about it, but I don't know. These cars are just too heavy and too big for this track, because we did not really get any overtaking, and arguably this year's Grand Prix was worse for overtaking than the previous years. And it's also because the only DRS zone that is in this track was shortened. Which to me, I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Does it make sense to you? I don't know.
No, I don't think so. As you said, we didn't see a lot of overtaking. Seemed almost worse than Hungary. But it was true. Sebastian Vettel organized, or I guess he organized, the event with all the drivers going out in the Senna shirt, except for Max Verstappen. But don't be alarmed, it wasn't in protest against Ayrton Senna's legacy. It was because his shirt got stolen, so he had to go out in apparently. So he had to go out in his Red Bull kit. Well,
wow. Okay, I didn't know that.
Weird.
I didn't know that. It looked really weird. It just looked like he didn't get the memo, right?
Yeah. Or just he really didn't like Senna. But while we're talking about Senna, McLaren are introducing a one-off livery for Monaco that is themed after the Senna helmet, the famous helmet, with the yellow, the blue, and the green. And Oscar Piastri also has a special helmet for the race in Monte Carlo, which is inspired by Senna's. So, but I have to say, McLaren, they do know how to make one-off liveries.
Yep.
The Marlboro one that they had, was it 2 years ago in Monaco? 3 years ago? The white and orange one. Then they had a chrome one not too long ago as well, right?
Yeah,
in Silverstone, was it? They really, when we saw what it looked like when Ferrari promised the one-off livery.
Yeah,
with
take notes.
Blue elements that we were supposed to see in Miami, and it ended up kind of ugly. Now the HP logo is stuck on the Ferrari livery, so I don't know how to feel about that. The white doesn't look too bad, but the Ferrari on the rear wing did look very nice. But yeah, this weekend actually started being interesting in Friday practice already, because we saw Max Verstappen struggling, as is quite unusual for the reigning world champion. He went off quite a few times, went into the gravel, was complaining about the car balance. What did you think when you saw Red Bull on the back foot again after Lando Norris and McLaren won last race?
It was interesting because, I don't know, like, you never expect Red Bull to not bounce back. It does not usually happen. Like, I've seen many of these, free practice blunders or mistakes or setup direction changes, and, in practice, they always utilize the best and they always come out pretty strong, as it was the case now. But it was not the case throughout the whole weekend. It was not a smooth qualifying session. It was not a smooth race till the end. I feel like this week we really got to see what a driver can make, in terms of the difference, right? Because you had Perez, who struggled, we talked about it last week about, him keeping up the form, and that it's probably a just question of time, or the matter of time, before the competition comes, knocking on the door, and there we will see the bigger gap of, what happened last year with Sergio Perez exiting even in Q2. So happened now. But yeah, I feel like for Max, it was an amazing weekend in terms of his performance. Like, he made the difference in qualifying, and it pretty much, it was advantage Verstappen for the whole race, right? Lando didn't qualify as well as he wanted to. He didn't get the qualifying lap, although he started second after, Oscar's penalty, but he didn't get the qualifying lap as neat and tidy as he wanted to. But it was also the first time in quite a bit, at least it feels like it, that we had a traditional weekend, right? 3 practice sessions, 1 qualifying session, 1 race, no sprint. So I feel also that Red Bull was kind of handed a joker card, that we did not have the sprint weekend right now. I feel like they would struggle so much more if it wasn't for that. Because you had Ferrari, who were pretty quick with the major upgrades, or their so-called SF24 Evo, the evolution, or perhaps a little bit of a revolution compared to their SF24. But yeah, also McLaren, quick. We saw it in the race. And Mercedes they weren't super far off. Let's put it that way. Their pace was okay, with some minor upgrades. But yeah, it was very interesting to just witness how, we've progressed from FP1 to all the way to qualifying. So what did you make out of the, Red Bull 2-driver situation?
Well, as you mentioned, Perez, I guess it was just a matter of time. And he really, once we got to the European leg of the calendar, he seemed to struggle last year, the year before. He's struggling now. I guess the circuits just don't suit him that well. Or he just really pushes at the start of the season and then he doesn't have it in him to continue. But it was quite interesting, because struggles that the Red Bull and Max Verstappen faced in the free practice sessions also impacted them later on in the race, because they focused so much on getting the balance right. They didn't really focus that much on running on the hard tires for that long, so they didn't have the chance to see how the car would behave, which resulted in Max Verstappen almost losing the win to Lando Norris once again, because the tire wear was just so horrible for the Red Bull car at the end of the race. But also, talking about Sergio Perez, there are talks about contracts right now, because as we know, silly season started early this year, and apparently Sergio Perez rejected Red Bull's 1-year contract extension and counter-offered a 2-year contract extension. So it's clear that Perez wants to stay at Red Bull, but question is, do they want to keep him for 2 years? Or should they look at some other potential replacements?
I feel like this is a little bit, as you mentioned, right? I've heard this too, and I've read this too, that, Perez has been offered a 1-year contract at Red Bull, but he wants a 2-year contract, which is fairly obvious because he wants to secure the seat for 2026 as well, which is the big regulation change. And then he'll be able to see the pecking order, right? Like right now, if he commits somewhere, for 2026, he's going into unknown waters. But this is a little bit of a Bottas kind of issue thingy, or a Bottas situation. Because if you remember, Valtteri Bottas, he never in his Mercedes years ever had more than a 1-year contract. He said himself after that it impacted him quite a lot. But, I understand the view of Perez, but I also understand the view of Red Bull, right? They have 2 amazing drivers in AlphaTauri. Arguably 3, because Liam Lawson is also knocking on the door, your unknown brother. But, this is exactly the moment where he should have just taken it, because if he again appears to Europe and he's just gonna perform like this, like in the race, he was nowhere. Like, let's be honest, he was supposed to be pretty good, like in terms of, because if you want to be in a car to overtake, it has to be the Red Bull, right? And he really made almost no progress. He finished P8, I believe, from P11, which isn't, which considering the pace of the Red Bull it's not great. He couldn't overtake. He hardly defended with anyone except Hamilton, because probably he just woke up of his deep sleep and he was like, oh, this is the guy I'm supposed to defend, So he just woke up and got a flashback Abu Dhabi 2021 and started to kind of defend. But yeah, it was not a great weekend for Perez, and it's going to be interesting to really see what Red Bull does, since he really rejected the offer. Because we've seen Yuki Tsunoda being like really, really good. He has outperformed Ricciardo once again. Yes, I believe he has scored a point. I think he was 10th in the race. I mean, it was Yuki's favorite racetrack. He's very good here. But Ricciardo wasn't far behind. But if he wants to compete for the Red Bull seat, he has to beat Tsunoda.
Consistently,
exactly.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, the Red Bull Junior team, RB or V-Carb, as they like to be called, they have a whole lineup of drivers who would love to have that Red Bull seat. But let's not forget Carlos Sainz, who is still without a drive for next year, after being sacked by Ferrari and to be replaced by Lewis Hamilton, which is still a bit controversial in certain circles. Or if you look under any of Ferrari's Instagram posts, you will see comments sounding like, you fired the wrong driver. Well, it depends on the weekend. But Carlos Sainz has pretty close ties to Audi. And he's been named as one of the potential drivers to join Audi alongside Nico Hülkenberg. Problem is, does he go there right now? Or does he go there in 2026? Because I think Carlos Sainz wouldn't mind a 1-year contract from Red Bull. He wouldn't ask him for a 2-year one because he can go to Audi the year after. But he probably doesn't want to spend a year in, kick Sauber, fucking around P12, I guess. And Mercedes are, it looks like, trying to bring in Kimi Antonelli.
Exactly. As you mentioned, like if we're looking at Sainz, he has a very weird situation, right? Like he's going from one of the top teams. I mean, Ferrari is a top team no matter their performance. They're always going to bounce back to be one of the top contenders no matter what the situation is. They always did bounce back. So yeah, from a race-winning car to potentially, Sauber as we know it now, like, Audi on one hand, it's cool. It sounds really amazing. But on the other hand, you just don't know. It can be the same thing as with Renault, right? There was also a lot of hype around Renault when they were returning. Then they rebranded to Alpine, and, Alonso was excited. He was like, yeah, well, Alpine it's their, like, I don't know, tear up sports brand and it's race brand and it's so much better and they have big plans. They're the works team. It's gonna be amazing. And look at Alpine, right? They're not performing well. So, and I think that Sainz is aware of that, right? Because you have to look at the current team's performance, and it's absolutely terrible. Even in terms of pace, everybody's upgrading the car. They're not upgrading the car with the same pace and with the same, timing. But as you mentioned, you have already Nico Hülkenberg confirmed for the drive of Sauber/Audi for next year. We saw Valtteri Bottas walking into the Williams garage.
Yeah.
That would be pretty interesting in my opinion, because that would be an amazing lineup. Albon and Bottas, because, both would learn from each other probably a lot. Mainly Albon from Bottas, because, Bottas is... Although many people make fun of him for being the number 2 of Mercedes, I think he still was a very, very good driver, and he proved it when he was beating Felipe Massa, right? So
he really was. No, I wouldn't discount Bottas at all, especially in his years as Lewis Hamilton's wingman. He did score the odd win, but he was never too far behind. We never saw a Checo situation where we would be wondering, should Mercedes sag this guy? Of course, once George Russell came up after Bottas was in that seat for a few years, it was probably a wise decision to bring in the new talent. But he was a very, very capable driver, especially in qualifying. And he also did show that during the 2021 season, where he helped Mercedes get the Constructors' Championship despite not winning the Drivers' one. So I think it would be a very, very cool lineup, as you said, coming from whence he came, Williams, after coming back home, so to speak. And we know that Albon now extended his contract after there are some debates whether he would. But I think it's if Williams manages to get on that upwards trajectory because James Vowles said that this is a long-term project, right? And if they build that car and that team around Alex Albon, I think that the potential to be a very strong pairing.
I agree.
And with Valtteri Bottas to add his wisdom that he gained from his years and years of experience from also Mercedes, and top teams, it would be quite interesting. And also just a reunion of Valtteri Bottas and James Vowles, his former
that has to be an aspect,
engineer.
Valtteri, it's James.
Valtteri, it's James. He's heard that many times. Sometimes it was to let Lewis by, but that's just how life in Formula One is. But that doesn't bode well for Logan Sargent's future, though.
Yeah, I agree, but I feel he's in his second season, right? And let's not forget, he's going up against Alex Albon, who's a very, very good driver. But he's not a world champion, right?
Yeah.
He might be a world champion material, for sure, but he's not really improved. He has beaten him once, but that was a questionable occasion, right? So and I feel like the data doesn't lie, and we know that James Vowles is a very data-driven person. So, and we see that there's no real, let's say, upwards trajectory from Sargent. I mean, he's not crashing, at least that's one, but he's not really getting much closer to Albon. He's not that consistent. He's not consistently quick. He doesn't put the laps together. And, it's a hard decision to make, but I feel like some experience from Mercedes, from Valtteri. He knows Williams also from the, let's say, more OG years, from 2012 onwards, or 2013, I believe. 2013, 14, 15, 16. He knows how to, how this team worked when it was working well. So that might add a lot, but it was also interesting to see, if I just go back, you mentioned Lewis Hamilton, right? And he was talking about, the potential seat at Mercedes. And I thought it was pretty funny that Hamilton said that, or it was a correct thing. I mean, I would agree with him saying that if it would be up to him, he would 100% put Kimi Antonelli into that Mercedes seat. But it's funny because if you remember a few years back when it was Valtteri and Lewis in that 2 seats, and they were speculating between choosing George Russell or Bottas for the 2nd seat, he was highly against Russell and in favor of Valtteri. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised, but it's a funny thing, you know. But in this case, he's right that, you know, it seems right now almost a sure thing that Antonelli will drive for Mercedes, you know, next year or the year after. But I still believe they would take the risk for next year because there were also tests at Silverstone, and they were comparing kind of, you know, the lap times or let's say the performance or handling with Mick Schumacher. So that was an interesting test to really make, you know. I mean, Mick Schumacher is probably not competing for that seat. There was also
probably not
Esteban Ocon who was saying that I'm still feeling like a Mercedes, you know, academy driver, and you know, I don't think that's going to happen. But just stirring the pot.
Yeah. And you mentioned, funny enough, you mentioned Mick Schumacher and Esteban Ocon, and both of them have been mentioned in discussions. Mick Schumacher has been mentioned as a potential driver for Alpine. Exactly. With Esteban Ocon talking about Haas as one of his options. Which...
Actually, he talked about Haas as his option.
Oh, I'm actually not sure if he's the one to mention, but there have been talks about Esteban Ocon and Haas pairing. Which... What are they doing down there, you know, at the bottom of the grid? But, you know, Haas has been doing fairly good this season. You know, let's remember preseason testing, and after Gunther Steiner was fired, everybody in the F1 community was guessing that they would be dead last. You know, no direction, you know, that they fired Steiner as a last resort. They have no idea what they're doing. They have no money. They have no car development. Their drivers are kind of meh, but they're doing fairly good. You know? And
they had an upgrade, which is it's unheard of for Haas mid-season, or
you
know, they just make good cars. They make their cars like in the winter testing, and you know, they just come up through the winter with their pretty much final car, and they don't really, you know, change the car much over the season, or they're usually the ones with the least amount of upgrades during the season. Let's put it that way. And interesting, they're putting off the upgrades now. So I think that's a good strategy because you know, you see the true weaknesses of the car, you wait for the correlation, and then you just pump up those upgrades that are not guaranteed, but highly likely to work. And in this case, it seemed like they were about to have a pretty good weekend. But it just seems like they lack a little bit of race performance as well, still. Yeah. But it's nothing compared to last year, where they just qualified and burned off their tires and
very true.
Were gone.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned upgrades. Quite a lot of teams brought upgrades to Imola, and we can break that down. You know, there are some that worked really well, you know, and that's been McLaren who brought the upgrades to Piastri's car, as the ones that they brought to Lando's last race, which we saw really worked, with Lando winning his first Grand Prix ever. Then Ferrari, which made them quicker, but the Ferrari was struggling quite a lot with straight line speed and drag this weekend, which prevented them from really catching the McLaren and Red Bull. But we might see what happens in Monaco, because the slower speed corners. We'll see how the Ferrari upgrades affect them there. But because the difference between McLaren and Ferrari in terms of bringing upgrades is that McLaren can just bring them kind of out of nowhere, and they're at the top, and everybody's wowed. But Ferrari, the fan base is so insane. They have people in the factory, you know, looking over the engineers' shoulders, and they're writing there are articles in Italian saying, we are so back, we are Fred Vasseris cooking. These upgrades will bring us to the top. And while partly true, it's kind of a case of overpromise and sometimes deliver, but usually less than the expectations make it out to be. But Charles Leclerc has been saying that he's confident in their ability to perform in Monaco, and we know that it's his home race, but he's had very bad luck there.
Yeah. Well, speaking of overpromising and underdelivering, I feel like we should discuss what happened in the race, and no better way to start off than with Aston Martin.
The perfect segue into
and as you actually mentioned, right, with the upgrades, they were the ones who had the biggest amount of upgrades going into Imola. And it was a shocking race for them. Stroll was ahead of Alonso in qualifying and in the race.
He's back.
He's so back, the championship contender.
Stroll 2026, Stroll 2027, he said it. And it could be true, but it's true. They're, Aston Martin, we saw this last year, where they really shined at the start of the season, but then over the course of it, they downgraded, it seemed like. And then when they rolled the upgrades back, they were actually better. So I have to wonder, what is going on in Aston Martin factories? Do they have the blueprints upside down? Why are they getting worse?
Well, actually, I have a question regarding this to you. So, do you think that Aston Martin using Mercedes wind tunnel and CFD is affecting their performance the same as, Mercedes has been struggling with their correlation in the wind tunnel? Do you think it has something to do with that?
That would be very, very funny. If you're saying that Mercedes could have a technical error somewhere in their testing facilities that they share with Aston Martin, and that's why both of these Mercedes powered cars are struggling. I wouldn't wish it upon them, but it would be a really interesting explanation.
Yeah, because for anyone wondering, Aston Martin is building their own wind tunnel, like a super high-end one. They're building their facilities and everything, but it's gonna be ready only in, I think, beginning-ish of 2025. So it's a year, it's gonna be there in 1 year. Meanwhile, they're using and borrowing or renting the simulator. They're renting the simulator of the Mercedes, right? So
yeah,
Aston Martin right now is using the simulator of Mercedes, which means, could this be a problem of the actual wind tunnel right now with these ground effect cars? Or is it a problem of miscalculation of, on both sides? Because we see it at both ends. It just seems like a similar problem, right? I mean, we're no engineers or anything, but it seems odd that the only two teams struggling to really put on meaningful upgrades, like the most, is Mercedes and Aston Martin, right? So we've seen, as you say, we've seen this last year with Aston Martin. And we have seen this with Mercedes as well. So, how do we solve this? What's happening?
Is this a lawsuit? Is Lawrence Stroll gonna sue Toto Wolff? I mean, could be. No, but, I mean, it's a very far-fetched explanation, I'd say. I guess, with all the technical expertise that must be present everywhere in all the facilities, but it would be quite funny. But Aston Martin, they are not doing that great. Alonso and Lawrence Stroll have been saying that they really want to get to the bottom of this and why this isn't working, because otherwise, Alonso already did extend his contract, but still, I don't think he's gonna be very happy if this goes on.
Yeah, I mean, it's early doors to judge. It's in many cases it takes a few races so that the teams analyze their upgrades and optimize the setup of the car, but it's also driver dependent. Let's not forget, the upgrade could have added performance, because data is one thing, right? It's when you add, I don't know, you see a added 0.3 a lap performance, looks good on paper, but when it disadvantages the driving style of one driver, which, I think that they focused a lot on the rear end of the car. Alonso has a very specific driving style. He's like one of the most, like, let's say, he's going for a lot of understeer. He is the king of understeer. And if the car changes characteristics, just, makes it more snappy. Like if the car is like, let's say, more pointy, or if the rear end is a little bit more snappy, or if you can trust the car so much, it's so difficult for someone to adapt from their style, Even with these current tires, I feel like both Alonso and Hamilton commented that, the Pirelli tires are not to the most amazing standards. So it's interesting to see Alonso struggle so much, because he's also the king of getting the most performance out of a very bad car. And we saw Lance Stroll not doing a great job, but doing a better job than Alonso this weekend, despite it not being a sprint race, because that would be a good excuse, right? Not finding the setup. But he changed the setup even going into the race. He had to start from the pit lane because he changed the setup. So that's, 3 practice sessions, 1 qualifying session, and race. And he still could not find a comfortable setup. It's crazy.
Well, even the all-time greats have a weekend not go that well for them. But a team that did have the weekend go well for them was definitely McLaren, who almost managed to get pole as well, except for Max Verstappen, doing his Q3 magic and putting in on top. McLaren were doing really good. And actually, Toto Wolff and Christian Horner have been saying now that Lando Norris could be a title contender here. But it's interesting because we've talked about this on this podcast quite a lot. Like, what is this season? Like what is actually happening? Are we about to see a 3-way fight between Ferrari, McLaren, and Red Bull, or has these 2 weekends been just anomaly in the total reign of the Red Bull racing team? Because, of course, it might seem like a pattern, but if you look at the specific issues that plagued Max Verstappen and, by extension, Checo Perez, well, not by extension, but this race, but because, for example, in Miami, the very hot weather and high temperatures saw a lot of tire wear from Red Bull, and Max Verstappen going over the bollard really didn't help either. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you saw a problem not with heat, but with tire wear as well in Imola, with the very bumpy circuit, with the physical tire wear. But the question is, do these anomalies translate into the season going forward, or is this something that we saw just in Miami and Imola?
I feel, as you mentioned, and there's one weakness that there has been a lot of talk about the Red Bull. The Red Bull, of course, it's a brilliant car. Like, it's still the fastest car. By no means. But not anymore. It has so much advantage it had. It only had a very slim advantage in the race. In this race, if any, if you look at the whole race, I don't know, maybe the McLaren on the hards it was definitely faster.
Yeah.
But there is a common issue with the Red Bull, and it's that they struggle a lot with understeer into, let's say, slower corners. Because you had the last 2 corners at Imola, and Max had a terrible run in pretty much almost every single lap. Even his pole lap, it didn't seem like he was completely happy. It hooked up so much better. But when you were looking at like Q1, Q2, you could see that he's struggling to turn the car. Even Perez going off because he said, look, well, my tires, like rear tires, they gripped so well, but the fronts, it just didn't work. And we know that Verstappen is going for the style of, pointy front end and a skatey rear end, which is, in this case, it doesn't really go into his hand. But this is exactly where I feel like it's gonna be difficult for them in Monaco. Because the car is, you have to be very confident in the car. And you have to turn the car. You have a lot of sweeping, changing directions, which was something that Ferrari was very good at. I don't know if they still are after this upgrade, but I can only assume that yes. And McLaren is super good at high-speed corners. So I feel as though this weakness will hurt them in Monaco. Well, I say that, and then Verstappen takes the pole by 5 seconds and wins the race by 50 laps. But
well, our predictions haven't been the greatest. We'll get to that in a bit as well.
Yeah, exactly. And, let's just get it out of the way. I feel like the race and the weekend overall, if we just look at the race, the first 70% of the race have been pretty boring. Because we could see, Piastri getting the penalty. He started behind the Ferraris, and we could see that Piastri was quicker than Sainz, then quicker than Leclerc at times.
Couldn't overtake.
He couldn't overtake. And it was exactly there where I was like, okay, well, we've got a problem because it's a one-stop. And if you don't have a significant tire advantage, you're not overtaking.
Yeah. And the first stint looked pretty typical, for a Max-dominated race. He extended by, 8 seconds?
Yeah.
But then once they switched to the hards, it was really apparent. Well, for a bit, it looked like there's a chance for Leclerc to win as well.
Yeah.
And he was getting very close to Lando Norris as well. But McLaren did say after the race that they just had their working window was very dependent on the conditions. And once they got into that window, Lando started gaining on Max really fast at the end of the race, which is where it started getting exciting. I mean, Leclerc got close to Lando. He was within that DRS range, but that he made that mistake and, went over the grass, lost DRS, and then also lost the pace. But Lando, he got those tires up to temperature, whereas by that time, Max's tires started to get really grainy, had a lot of tire wear. So we just saw a pretty intense battle for the win until the very last lap. And if there were a few more laps, probably Lando Norris would be a 2-time winner by now. But it really showed that the way your car behaves on certain conditions, especially with the tires, plays a key role. And you can't, until you get to the point where your car is at its best, you can't even tell who the winner is going to be. But overall, yes, I would agree. The race was kind of boring until the last 15 or so laps.
Exactly. Yeah. Because, I feel like the ending was so exciting because you just saw Lando at the live timing. You just saw that he's every lap, he's eking into that gap. At times, it was even 1 second per lap, which is crazy. And then let's not forget, it was also the factor that, Verstappen had a black and white flag issued to him because he was, he was corner cutting or he was extending the track limits. And it was enough only, if he would have extended the track once more, if he would have violated the track limits once again, it would be a 5-second penalty. So it was a 2-factor thing, right? One was, okay, so will he force him into an error, right? And the second thing is he going to be fast enough to overtake? Well, sadly for Lando, Red Bull was still probably the fastest car on the straight, which, was... You only can overtake pretty much on the straight if you have same tires, same age of the tires, similar car performance. The only way to overtake now is through the RS. But Ferrari was surprisingly slow on the straights, which was shocking. But at the same time, I still feel that such an upgrade, it was a pretty significant one. They still need to study it and know, a little bit more about it. So I feel it will come.
As I said, I feel like the importance of the upgrades brought to him might have been a little overstated, which I fell for as well, I get. very excited. I predicted a double podium. Well, we'll get to that. But no, Ferrari have been saying that, okay, yeah, we brought upgrades, but, we're not stopping, and when and how you upgrade your car is very key, because if you bring your upgrades a race earlier than the competitors, you can go from 5th to 1st. And I think it's just very exciting this season. We have an amazing season actually in front of us, because the top teams are bringing upgrades that work well at some circuits, work better than the others upgrades at some circuits. So we kind of we never actually know what's in the store for us, what's in store for the world of F1, because as we saw, if McLaren can bring an upgrade that where they really do well at high speed, circuits, a lot of straights, then who knows what Ferrari might come up with, or how Red Bull responds. And if Aston Martin and Mercedes find the bug in their wind tunnel, then they might do something as well. But it makes me more excited for the rest of the season, I have to say, than I was 2, 3, 4 races ago, when it looked like it was just going to be Max Verstappen every single race again.
Yeah, this is getting very exciting. Like, of course, we should manage our expectations still, because I mean, the Red Bull had an upgrade this weekend as well. They had a different floor, or at least a floor edge. So they added performance likely as well. They probably need still a race or two to understand those upgrades properly. But I still feel as though if McLaren, whatever they stick on the car, it just seems to work in quite a bit.
Yeah. They know what they're
when
doing.
They come with an upgrade, it's going to be one to look for, because this is what we wondered last year. We were like, oh, if only McLaren started out like this, it would have been such an, interesting season. And I feel like we're getting this. Even Ferrari. The preseason testing, it looked like it's going to be a clear cut. It's going to be goodbye, Verstappen, 4-time world champion, 22 races, won. But
24, isn't it, actually?
Yeah, but I was leaving 2 for, I don't know, whatever he wants.
Okay.
And he actually, this week, he competed in a sim race, right? So he won 2 races.
Yeah, that was insane. He was
crazy.
He took a break from his sim race to go win a Grand Prix in F1. It really seems like that's his hobby right now, and sim racing is his real job. But, good for him.
Inevitable. Inevitable. This is the word I have about Verstappen. Like, wherever you are, in whichever category you are, you just need to look out for Verstappen. Like, if you're a truck driver, you just need to look out for Verstappen, because you never know when he's coming. But it was pretty crazy to have 2 race wins in one weekend, because I think it was like it was not like he was driving for 20 minutes, right? He was driving for hours, because it was a 24-hour race with his team.
No, love him or hate him, you have to respect Max Verstappen for just his sheer dedication to racing as a sport. Doesn't matter if it's sim racing, it doesn't matter if it's F1, doesn't matter if it's whatever he decides to do after. Which, I have to say, not that I want to see Max Verstappen retire, might help the situation in terms of competitiveness, but it's gonna be interesting to see what Max Verstappen decides to do after F1, Le Mans, Rally, IndyCar, whatever.
Beat more records. That's it.
Beat more records. And I wouldn't blame him, and I wouldn't be mad if he managed to beat all of them.
Yeah, he's a generational talent. I mean, I would, before he retires, before he gets bored of this domination, I just wish and I hope we get I want to see him again in a proper title fight. Because seeing him race in 2021, to some people it may have caused trauma. Understandable. But the racing we got, every race was a banger. Except for maybe 1 or 2, but it was, it was the best season by far. It was not even close to anything that was recently. Because the skill, right? Verstappen super aggressive. Hamilton, he soon realized he needed to be aggressive with Verstappen as well. And both brilliant drivers. They crashed a few times, but like the majority of going wheel to wheel, it was just incredible to watch. You just knew the skill. And I really, really want this back. And I feel like with Lando and Verstappen, we can get this as well. If Leclerc gets added to the mix, Piastri, Sainz, I feel like we're going to be up for something pretty incredible. So, yeah, like if it wasn't Imola this weekend, it would have been a different story. Because you would have so many more overtaking opportunities. You can't really take, because when drivers are following each other, pretty closely, usually what they do when they try to preserve their tires and the downforce on their car, they're just following a different line. They're crossing the line so they get clear air, and then they also, get better exits and stuff. But in Imola, you can't really do alternative lines. It's so narrow, this track, no runoff. You just need to follow the car essentially, like, except for like a few turns. But yeah, Monaco is gonna be an interesting one, but I'm looking forward to these conventional tracks where overtaking is possible, and we will see something like Leclerc versus Verstappen in Bahrain, 2022.
That would be amazing. And you mentioned 2021. Don't forget that was the last year of the regulations, which is where the teams usually end up the most equal, and we will be in a similar situation next year in 2025. So one can hope that before the engine regulations change, we might get a proper, nasty title fight once again. And if it's three-way, then all the better. Maybe, but yeah, as you said, excited for Monaco, but it might be time to go over our predictions for Imola.
Yeah.
Because I don't know about you, but mine didn't go that well.
Right. I just want to add to, you had a brilliant point about the last year of regulations. And it feels kind of strange because 2021, we had the best title fight in years, right? If not ever. We don't know. But we're biased because
in our lives, probably in our time of watching,
likely,
or in our time watching F1.
I've seen Hamilton versus Massa last lap, last turn, Brazil, but it depends, what you remember more, and definitely like 2021 is fresh-ish in our memories, so that's why we consider it such a brilliant battle. But just wanted to get back to that, like, I don't know, it feels to me that every time we're, starting off with regulations, we just seem to wanting to change them immediately because one team benefits and something is not great, something just turns out to be worse than expected. But towards the end, we just, the cars, they just go, so close in terms of their performance, even despite probably different concepts. So do you think we should just stop doing different and creating different regulations? Should we just stick with one type of regulation and get the cars as close as possible?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, I'm wondering if maybe the push and pull between regulations and the evolutions of the cars, if that isn't a part of the spirit of F1, because of course, if it would be very cool to see what it would look like if, perhaps there were no regulations and the engineers could go wild, with what they did. Maybe make a car that shoots flame at the other cars or something. But if there was one set of regulations, then it could be interesting. But at some point you would really hit the limits probably of those regulations. And I personally, at least as of now, think that introducing those regulations, if they make sense, and if they make the racing better, then that it just makes sense, and that it's just a part of F1.
Right. Also, or at least instead of creating one set of regulation, extending. Because we didn't get a title fight that was, amazing before 2021. Like, we had Vettel versus Hamilton and Rosberg, but Rosberg was in the same team, so it was quite different. But I feel like we need to extend it because, like, it seems like we're getting at the peak, but whenever we're at the peak, we just immediately somebody benefits, and it's a restart, and it just feels like a punch in the face. It's just like we were getting something amazing, people were tuning in, people were excited, and now it's like, oh, predictable, right? So that's something I would consider. And if you take, for example, right, because the drivers' careers are fairly long these days. If we look at Alonso, let's take into consideration with which kind of cars he raced. He raced with V10s, he raced with V8s, he raced with these V6 hybrids, right? Now with the eco-fuel, synthetic fuel, whatever-ish. He's gonna race in 2026 with these weird engines that are, 50-50 in terms of power, I believe, or something like this. A lot more electric. He would drive with the ground effect cars. He would drive with the small cars. He would drive with the 2014 weird nose style cars. And, he has lived through so many direction and, regulation changes that, you might wonder what would happen today if you put all these drivers in the V10s of 2000 and, I don't know, 4s, 5s. You never know. So whenever it's changing so much, we just know it's sometimes hard to keep up, right?
Yeah. Well, to keep up, you just have to be Fernando Alonso. And that's why he's the GOAT.
So let's move to the predictions,
according to some,
right?
Yeah. Well, my prediction was a double podium for Ferrari because I was very confident in their upgrades. And, Charles Leclerc did stand on the podium. Carlos Sainz did not, however, so I'm afraid I failed my last week's predictions. What about you?
Well, I probably have done a bit worse than you because I have predicted a different race winner this year, which unfortunately did not happen. One team had the pace so that this could change. Because Oscar Piastri was in a pretty good position before his penalty. He was P2, and of course, we know that his race pace is not as good as Lando's. However, you never know. So, but still, no points.
Could have been.
No points for me. So, unfortunately, we gotta live to the next day, and we have to look for the predictions for the Monaco Grand Prix.
Yeah. And, well, I'll be bold again and talk about podiums again. And I'll get on that Red Bull is falling off the cliff train and say that Red Bull won't have a driver stand on the podium.
That is very bold.
I will believe that McLaren and Ferrari will just take it away and Red Bull will struggle.
If you failed on this prediction, just remember the word inevitable, right? Inevitable. Yeah. Well, for me, I'm going kind of bold based on the past results, but I'm predicting that Sergio Perez will outqualify Max Verstappen. I feel as, there are subtle hints that, of course, I'm not going based on this qualifying, which was completely atrocious from Perez, but I'm going off the fact that the Red Bull has a little problem with their front end of the car. And we know that Verstappen just needs the front end to work. And in Monaco, it's especially difficult to get it right. And, Verstappen's history with Monaco is mixed. And Perez's Monaco history is kind of mixed as well.
He's the king of the streets. Exactly. I almost said queen of the streets, but king of the streets.
Maybe queen. If Verstappen wins in Monaco, then he is officially the queen of streets. But
well, or Perez might do what he did a few years back and, set a good lap and then just put it into the barrier so he keeps it.
Spinala. Exactly.
I guess we'll see on Saturday.
We'll have to see. We'll have to see. But I still believe that this is possible because Jerez, for some reason, turns up when there are street circuits. So we shall see.
True. That and Azerbaijan, we'll see. And to cap it off, the driver of the weekend, for the final straight F1 podcast, who would you nominate?
Well, I have to say, this weekend for me, it has to be Max Verstappen. It might be a boring thing to say, but I feel like he made the difference. I don't know. It's not easy to admit to many people, but like, it's for sure a difference he made in qualifying. It's for sure a difference he made in the race. So I feel like he deserves the driver of the weekend. What about you?
Well, I was actually gonna agree, but because I have to admit he's that guy, and also my dislike of seeing Verstappen win has diminished slightly since he isn't winning as much as he did the past few years. But I will say, we gave it to him last week, but just so we differ, I will give it to Lando Norris because he did manage those tires and then went on a mission, and I fully believe that he could have taken that win if the race was just a few laps longer, and he really went all out on those last 10-15 laps, driving to the limit, but keeping it clean, keeping it on the track, and a very good performance all weekend long, I'd say.
And you want to know a funny fact? It's the third time in a row you have selected Lando Norris as your driver of the weekend. So this domination of Norris is getting boring.
Well, my memory is very short then. I don't recall him 2 weekends ago. Well, is my allegiance changing? Is my heart changing from red to orange? I hope not, but once I promise you, if Flickr comes anywhere close to winning or getting on pole, I am putting him as my driver of the weekend. So I can promise you that. And hopefully that will be this weekend. But we just have to wait and see.
We have to wait and see. Well, one final thing I thought would be cool to say is to rate the race from, 1 to 10. The race of Imola. I'm not going to read the title again because I can't be bothered.
MSC Cruises, made in Italy, Gran Premio Emilia Romagna, of course. Well, what would you say?
Well, I have to say it's a 5 out of 10. Like,
I was about to say the same. Yeah.
If it was not for the ending, it would have been a 2 out of 10.
A dud, yeah.
Like, we wouldn't see many things happening, but the ending was just super good. And I hope that, because we know Monaco is, with these generation of cars, it's mostly about qualifying. But we have had pretty good races. Last time we were out, it was the rain, which surprised everyone.
It was quite intense.
So let's, everybody, let's do the rain dance when Sunday comes. Maybe even Saturday. Well, why not? But
depends on how qualifying goes. Then I might.
Exactly. I would agree. And we hope that you will tune in next time and see you after the Monaco Grand Prix, so you know the story of the Monaco Grand Prix.
See ya.
Goodbye.